A pleasure to be with you as always. With no further ado, let's plunge right in to explore the beauty of our planet's coral reefs and some of the relationships, curious and unlikely as they may be, amongst the competitors and predators of the sea. The silent surface of the sea creates an illusion of tranquility, when in fact, underneath that very surface are ongoing innumerable battles for survival, battles between predator and prey. Down here, the mantras are relatively simple. Number one, eat, but don't get eaten. Number two, survive to reproduce. Because I think you'd agree, the survival of any species is dependent upon basically feeding and breeding. And in the coral reef's competitive and complex food web, each species is endowed with an arsenal of offenses for poisoning, stinging, ambushing, eating, and/or killing. And meanwhile, each species is also endowed with ornate and intrinsic defenses against predation. So each species has its own strengths and its own weaknesses, the latter of which its competitors are continually striving to exploit. The coral reefs can only live as deep on the seafloor as sunlight can permeate the sea above. So inasmuch as ocean depths can be as deep as nearly 7 miles at the Atlantic and Pacific's deepest points, sunlight can only penetrate the most superficial 100 meters of that. So therefore, the coral reefs, as outlined in this red rhomboid there, are basically limited to the most superficial depths of the ocean floor, where sunlight can indeed reach to support photosynthesis, that is harnessing energy from the sun to produce energy for the whole rest of the planet. So the base of the food web for our entire planet really is on these coral reefs. But inasmuch as coral reefs only occupy less than 1% of the seafloor, those same coral reefs support almost a third of all marine life in the entire sea as we know it. So I would encourage you, the next time you're either snorkeling yourself or in a submersible or a glass-bottom boat, don't just look at the fish and say, oh, what a pretty yellow, white, and black fish. Or if you know the species is a raccoon butterfly, that's great. But don't just swim on to see what else is there. Hover and contemplate, if you would, for a moment, what indeed is this species' adaptation for survival in a very competitive and overcrowded coral reef. Now, we all know that if you were a predator looking upon this relatively small fish as potential prey, you'd be best to attack it by its head. Because if all you did was nip at its tail, it might be able to swim away and all you get is a little morsel of fin. Whereas if you can attack and ambush from the head, you're more likely to get a tasty meal out of this small fish. Well, this fish is adapted very cleverly for survival on the coral reef. For where would you think this fish's head is? Well, obviously it's where the eye is. And what predator wouldn't think that's the eye of this fish? The next species is known as the four-eyed butterfly, specifically because that looks much more like an eye near the tail. You can barely even recognize the eye by the true face or true head of this fish. Other adaptations for survival are basically just personality, if you will. Here, this very defensive damsel, this dusky damsel weighs but 6 ounces. I just came in innocently running video, hovering at the surface above it, but you can see the tenacity and persistence with which he darts at me to ward me off. I weigh easily 500 times more than he does, yet he has that personality, as it were, to ward off predators. Notice his defensive posturing, the erection of the dorsal spines on his dorsal fin. He doesn't just swim by the camera, he erects those dorsal spines to show me in a very defensive posturing that this is his part of the coveted coral reef. So once I recognized that he was clearly annoyed by my presence, I just continued snorkeling and stopped videoing, snorkeled away. I'll be darned he didn't come up behind me and bite me in the calf anyway, even though I was already leaving. I mean, don't shoot me in the back, you know? Another fish that's well known, but primarily for its offensive and almost frightening teeth, is the barracuda. But honestly, a barracuda has never been documented to have bitten a human. But just watch his body language by virtue of his mouth and teeth as he tells me, this is my spot on this coral reef. Please enjoy. Wow. The beautiful, graceful, elegant barracuda.